Hello and welcome to the Your Revolution podcast. The Your Revolution podcast is a collaboration between Revolution Personal and Performance Training in Melbourne and the Me Project. The purpose of the Your Revolution podcast is to inspire you on your mission of betterment. Each week on the podcast, you'll meet game changers who have created extraordinary lives, and you'll listen to stories and lessons to empower you to make the changes necessary to your life. The Your Revolution podcast is committed to fitness, health, nutrition, mindset, community, education, empowerment, and betterment, and we hope that you can take what you learn here and apply it to your very own revolution.
Welcome to episode 102 of the Your Revolution podcast. It is me, your host, Greg Kourpanidis, and as always, for all podcast-related things, go to revopt/podcast. Today, we're going to be joined by the one and only Coach Chris Shen. Chris is my wrestling coach at Team Takedown, and is someone I've been very fortunate enough to train under and work with since 2017. One of the big things which drew me to want to train with Coach Chris and Team Takedown was his very scientific approach and his particular focus in the mental side of the game. This is actually something I personally touched on in episode 100 with myself during the recovery of an ACL repair. Coach Chris played a huge role in my recovery, particularly in the early stages, as the battle for me during this period was even before I got on the operating table, and Coach Chris helped me stay present and embrace the grind. Chris has a wealth of experience as a martial artist with over 40 years across multiple arts and has represented Australia in wrestling. In addition to a stellar career competitively, he is also a psychologist and has worked with a wide population from athletes to everyday weekend warriors. He has also very recently wrote a book, Wrestling with Resilience, which is a handbook to guide the reader through challenges and adversity that may face in everyday life, the workplace, and so forth. Please see the link below. Coach Chris, look, he was an absolute pleasure to have on the podcast, and I really think all listeners to this episode are going to take a lot away with the interview, particularly the insights through his work as a psychologist and how he was able to successfully implement it into his coaching. Enjoy this episode, guys. So, without further ado, let's give Chris a warm welcome. Chris.
G'day, Greg. Pleased to be here.
I just wanted to kick things off as to give our listeners a bit of an introduction to who you are.
Lovely. That's a broad question. I'm a wrestling coach and a mixed martial artist. Have been involved in the martial arts in various guises since I was 4, so approximately 44 years or so, which is giving away my age, of course. I'm also a psychologist, a registered psychologist, and have been practicing for over 20 years, and there's a large crossover between both my professional work as a psychologist and my coaching, and I also officiate in the sport of mixed martial arts.
Wow, fantastic.
Thank you.
Quite a resume. So we will definitely get into that coaching and
Sure.
And the psychology background. But first I want to ask, what sort of got you into martial arts and training? Like, how old were you? And
Thank you. I was 4 years old when I was first exposed to martial arts, and my elder brother Albert was 6, so he's 2 years older. We initially started in judo, and the reason rationale for that, it's kind of historically interesting. Insofar as, Greg, our family, my parents were immigrants to Australia. My dad from mainland China and my mum from Penang in Malaysia. And they migrated to Australia, met in Melbourne in the 1960s, and my dad was trained as a pharmacist. And the state government built a hospital in Traralgon, a regional hospital, and my dad was the pharmacist, the chief pharmacist for that local hospital. And my brother Albert and I were born there. So we were the only Asians in the whole of the Latrobe Valley for much of the 1970s and 80s. And my dad was very, very bright. He actually thought it was prudent for the two of us to learn martial arts, not only for self-defense, but also for confidence and discipline. And so we started when we were 4, and that triggered a lifelong commitment.
Wow. Well, obviously I have 2 brothers myself, so I can imagine there would have been a lot of practice in the...
Oh, indeed.
In the...
Absolutely.
No.
And it's nice to have a lifelong training partner, and I can attest my brother Albert is the best and finest martial artist I've ever seen.
Wow. Okay. There you go. And can you sort of touch on your own sort of experience competitively? Like you said, you started off with judo.
Thank you.
What other sort of martial arts did you?
Thank you. In respect, Greg, to your question about competition, in reverse chronological order, so most recently, I'm known as a wrestling coach and as a wrestler. I was fortunate and blessed enough to represent Australia in wrestling, and that's the highest level I've competed in. In other martial arts, I had 4 mixed martial art fights in the very, very early days of mixed martial arts in Australia in the Shuto organisation. So I'm a C-class shooter, which is an amateur shooter. Yep. And I was also a state karate champion in forms, and my brother and I were national karate champions as well in a discipline called what was it called again? It was bunkai. It was the application of kata in forms.
Wow. Okay. And can you also talk about, I guess, many people might not know in terms of, like, the training demands, like sort of like how the type of style of training you would do for wrestling or mixed martial arts in general?
Sure. Rigorous and extremely grueling is my response, and so certainly the way I retired in 2008. When I was competing in mixed martial arts and wrestling was between approximately 1999 and about 2008. Yep. And so during that time period, for some of it I was being coached. For the last period of time, I was coaching myself with what became Team Takedown with my training partners from my wrestling team. And I applied the lessons I'd learned from then leading competitors and coaches from Team Quest, which was Randy Couture, who was the UFC heavyweight and then light heavyweight and then back to heavyweight champion at the time. And the gym in which I was training, Extreme Jiu-Jitsu and Grappling, had a very strong friendship with Randy Couture and his coaches. So I was fortunate enough to learn quite a bit from there. Most predominantly, I also learnt through my Australian coach at the time, wrestling coach Chris Brown, Australia's most successful wrestler. He competed at 5 Olympic Games and won the US Open, which is unheard of as a tremendous accomplishment for an Australian, and also came 4th at an Olympic Games. And John Donnie, who was my jiu-jitsu coach for a period of that time when I was competing. And then also my current coach, Coach Eric Paulson from America, who was the then world light heavyweight champion in Shuto.
Wow. Okay, so it's quite a lot of people learn from him. Absolutely.
And further to that, since I retired, I've endeavoured to bring a very, very scientific approach to my coaching. I'm blessed, Greg, to work as a team psychologist in sports such as Aussie Rules football, and I was based as a consultant to the Victorian Institute of Sport for a large amount of time and befriended deliberately the physical performance and strength and conditioning and biomech and sports science staff, and now have lots of advisors and friends that I would ask them what's the best program to develop power and conditioning for a mixed martial arts competitor, and tried to put all of that together whilst I was coaching my then fighters and now my wrestlers.
Okay. And can you talk about also, I guess, some of the hurdles, I guess, obstacles that you faced while, I guess, competing competitively?
Absolutely. Perhaps most saliently, Greg, finances. The martial arts, and I include wrestling as a combat sport, the martial arts in Australia especially are quite impoverished. The vast majority, if not all of the competitors, and I know you fall into this boat as well, self-fund. So we self-fund not only our training, yet our equipment, our attire, travel to competitions and entries, which is quite expensive. And then if we're actually very very good, then you're paying as well to be part of representative teams and to travel. And so finance is probably the first, or a first hurdle. A second is the grueling nature of preparation for wrestling and mixed martial arts is such that we accrue injuries, and there's very few combatants or competitors, certainly in mixed martial arts, yet also in wrestling, kickboxing, Muay Thai, who are not carrying injuries of some sort. So when I go to weigh-ins, for example, for a mixed martial arts bout where I'm an official, everybody's carrying an injury. They're all trying to hide their injuries from their opponents, and because of the nature of the sport. Whereas if you take the other approach of trying to wrap your competitors in too much cotton wool, you're not conditioned for the fight, and then you can be found out. So it's this real fine line. It's a fine line. I was going to say, a super fine, as I know you know, of course, as somebody who competed at the nationals in wrestling. Other hurdles commensurate with the finances. We all have to work. Some are lucky enough to study and be supported either through I'll study. What am I saying? I'll study or other means. Maybe wealthy parents. It'd always be nice to have due born into wealth, of course. Yet the vast majority of us have to work, and so it isn't just the time away from training. It's that time away fatigues you both mentally and physically. And so by the time you actually turn up at your regular training, you're already a little bit tired. That can lead to poor technique, which can lead to injuries, as well as it can lead to what's called rumination, which is when we brood about negatives in our life. And so we therefore have poorer training sessions and develop poor technique or get hurt.
Now, I guess going more back to the wrestling part of it, what made you particularly like wrestling and want to pursue that?
Thank you. That's a great question, Greg. I love wrestling, especially the international forms of wrestling, freestyle and Greco-Roman wrestling. I also like jacketed grappling, and so sambo, judo, and pretty much anything where you can put your hands on someone and grapple them. And the reasons, the rationales are plenty-fold, which are every culture on earth has a grappling or fighting sport in its history. And some of the earliest Greco-Roman urns depict images of not only wrestlers, yet the angels, wrestling in Judeo-Christian, wrestling demons or Satan or something like that. And so one, historically really appeals to me. The second is, outside of war, and I respect military forces, whether they be airmen and women, sailors or army. Outside of war, which is a very real battle, the closest you can come in sport to genuine one-on-one combat is wrestling, where it's your will against his or her will. It's nothing personal. It's about who has done his or her best homework, who's best prepared. And the rules of, especially freestyle and Greco, Greg, are set up that they extol and demand work. You have to be active. You get called for passivity, so you can't just hold on and wrap someone up like you could in some other grappling sports. The rules demand and the history demands you to be constantly coming forward and attacking, and that really appeals to me. So one, it's the historical element, and secondly, it's the gladiatorial aspect of it, Greg.
Yeah, that's a great point you make. I think the purity, that's...
Thank you for coining that. That's what I was looking for, the historical purity. And furthermore, purely on pragmatic grounds, I am perfectly built for wrestling. So I'm 5'7". I've got really, really strong legs. I've got a good neck, and I'm quite squat, both physically and psychologically. I'm really built for wrestling. Whereas when I competed in sports or trained in sports like boxing, Muay Thai, I'd be getting caned by longer range. Whereas I'm kind of squat and powerful.
Yeah. No, absolutely, yeah. And I can really relate to that because also I used to play myself a lot of competitive team sports, and I think the love that what drew me to it was that, so like as you touched on that one-on-one, your will against theirs, and very set amount of rules. So wow, that's a great point.
Thank you. And further to your wise self-reflections and self-disclosure, one of my role models, Coach Dan Gable, often talks about wrestling as what's that quote? It's up on my wall somewhere. I should know this from heart, by heart. That gold medals are not. They're made of particular sweat and perspiration and effort, and that really appeals to me about wrestling. It's literally our will against his or her will.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, now, a little slightly off in terms of your wrestling, you're also a psychologist.
I am, thank you.
I guess what made you want to pursue that?
Thank you. It was a combination of my love of martial arts and my interest in human behaviour. Now, the love of martial arts is that I've always been interested in being able to work in martial arts, and when that wasn't financially feasible, when I realised that as a young lad, then I expanded that to sport, because I've loved all sport. Growing up in country Victoria, loved Aussie rules football. Loved Aussie rules football. Bundled together, Greg, with my interest in human behaviour. I've always been particularly interested in human behaviour, particularly detective work. I remember as a young 11-year-old, 9-year-old, voraciously reading crime novels or watching BBC crime shows with my parents from behind the sofa, and being thrilled by not the gratuitous violence and so forth when I was reading or watching. It was the detective work. It was putting together the pieces after a crime and being able to say, "Oh, so you're the killer," that sort of thing. And I love the meticulous nature of being able to look at evidence or cues, particularly human behaviour, and then form deductive hypotheses and then test your hypotheses as more information comes to hand, and then continuously improve. And that essentially, I've just described the work of a psychologist, which is a patient or a client presents him or herself. We explore with him or her what their particular factors or issues or disabilities or even just their areas that they'd like to work on are. We form deductive hypotheses, trial those, and then keep continuously improving. And so that really appeals to me. And then when I realised in 1987, Greg, the Australian tennis player Pat Cash won Wimbledon, and I was watching that at about 1 a.m, in our lounge room in Traralgon, and after he won, he jumped up into the stands and was hugging, and the narrator said, "Oh, that's his coach, and that's his physical trainer, that's his sports psychologist." And I was thinking, what's that? Hang on, I can combine my love and interest in detective work, in being an anthropologist and sport. There's a profession I can do that. And so I raced to school the next day and asked one of my teachers, what's this sports psychology thing? And these are the days before the internet. And so we did a bit of research, and I think we actually had to write some letters to people. And
books.
And, correct. Got some letters back. And found that this is a profession that was nascent at the time, called sports psychology. And so then my long-winded answer to your question is the way I came to be a psychologist is through sports psychology. I ended up going to university, doing a science degree, did my honours, and then enrolled in a master's in sports psychology.
Wow, okay. And they particularly, you talk about your work focusing around sport and performance. So at the moment, as you said, you're working with some football, various football codes. Can you sort of elaborate on the sort of work that you do?
Absolutely.
With them?
Here. Thank you so much. I'm actually very, very blessed to be, and this is like a time capsule as much as by the time this comes out, this will actually be the case. So what I can reveal is I'm currently working as team psychologist with the Northern Knights Football Club in the AFL's Elite Pathway Program, in the Under-18 Pathway Program. I started a week ago with Equestrian Victoria's show jumping team as their team psychologist. And I've just been appointed, and I'm about to have a meeting this coming weeks with the general manager to plan my new role, which I can officially announce because this will come out in the future.
Yes.
Which, when you're listening to it, will be in the past, so it's all mysterious.
Yes.
I've been appointed psychologist with the National Institute of Circus Arts. And I'm very, very, very excited about working with that population of performers because of their athleticism and the very unique factors and issues that may bring, which leads me to responding to your question. As a psychologist working with performers and athletes, I have two roles. The first is to look after their welfare and well-being, Greg.
Sure.
And so I'm responsible for not only putting in place training and programs and creating an environment that bolsters the mental health of the team members and coaches and officials. I also respond to crises and whether the performer or athlete refer themselves to me, or the coaches or their parents or loved ones or guardians. So around welfare and well-being, I both proactively create, like prehab, I create an environment, I run training, I run mindfulness sessions before games to foster mental health, and then I respond to crises and issues and problems. So that's one role. The second column is performance psychology. So then I work one-on-one with players and also with the group, teaching them principles, tips and techniques to increase their sporting performance. So I see that they're conjoined, so there is overlap between the welfare and well-being and the performance psychology.
Wow, okay. Now, that's one interesting thing you point out now about, I guess, psychology in general, obviously for, I think, particularly with males, sort of like mental health, something that, I find a lot of males have trouble, with have. So how do you find encouraging, I guess, particularly the male athletes to, I guess, consult you? And
Thank you, Greg. That's very, very wise as an observation. And indeed, the very fact that you made that insightful observation embodies that. I've been working as a psychologist since 1999, and in 2019, it has never been more supportive an environment for members of the community, especially men who historically had a greater reticence than women to express vulnerability that they need help. So in answer to your very good question, if I'm working specifically with a team or an organisation, I embed myself. So I turn up to regular trainings, I interact with the players and their families, I promote good practices, and then I essentially wait until I actually get approached or that their coaches or parents or others contact me and ask me to speak to that particular player. And the reason I do that is I have learned over the journey that you can't force someone to open up.
Sure, absolutely.
Particularly if there already is reticence that exists. Rather, I present myself as a trustworthy member of the staff who can assist them. However, you know what? You don't have to. And so, for example, Greg, with the Northern Knights, before every game, I will run, in the pre-game, I'll run a mindfulness session. And so just for us, it's just before the main team meeting. It's scheduled that, my surname's Shen. Shen will be running a mindfulness session for 8 minutes. And what I'll do is I'll just put my hand up and say, okay, who wants to join me? Various players and staff come and join me, but the rest, they don't have to. And yet, interestingly enough, what I've found is we're 6 rounds into our season in 2019, players who previously didn't come to the sessions are now asking me at training, what happened, Sheeny, at the mindfulness session? And so then they're starting to say, could I come along? And I'll respond, of course you can. Whereas if it was mandatory, what you do is you expose people's vulnerabilities.
Sure.
So I like to make the mental health stuff optional, and so people can elect. And the research consistently demonstrates that if patients self-elect for treatment, they report greater treatment outcomes.
Wow. Okay. That's fascinating. I guess another broad sort of question. Like
Sure.
how are you sort of able to balance everything? Does it sound like you're very busy? You've got lots in terms of, I guess, the training, the wrestling, psychology. How do you do it?
Outstanding time management is essentially it. So I run courses on time management, so I try to embody good practices. And all jokes aside, I do endeavour, Greg, to... actually, let me withdraw that and start again. I am very blessed in so much as I have high motivational fit to a diverse variety of work. So I actually enjoy doing lots of different things. And so that kind of compels me. If I know, for example, Monday night I'm seeing patients in my practice at Moonee Ponds. Tuesday I'm at the footy club. Wednesday... So if I know it's like that, I'll be compelled to really prepare and deliver services to that particular client or patient group. And then I'll know, tomorrow I'm over here. And so I'll kind of generate my own energy and my own good time management practices.
Another thing I want to talk about is your... Do you have like a training philosophy or something?
I certainly do.
Yes. So you want to...
well, firstly, our motto, as you well know, is impose your will.
Impose your will, yeah.
No, what does that mean, Greg? So for me, that emerged when I was training and competing in wrestling.
Yep.
And my then coach, Coach Brown, would yell out, come on, Shen, it's your will against his will.
Yes.
And I actually really liked that. And so when I started coaching people, I would yell that. And of course, I'm quite... I like to talk a lot. And so that went from it's your will against his will to, impose your will, And I like that because it's an exhortation for us to get the best out of ourselves. And I like it because it's not judgmental. It's just that, well, impose your will, do the best that you can.
No, very good.
My training philosophy flows from that, which is get the best out of ourselves from turn up on time, be well prepared, have your right gear and equipment, be safe with training partners. Now we know accidents happen. Unfortunately, both of us know accidents happen, no matter what. However, control everything that's within our control regarding safety, because we literally put our lives into the hands of our training partners in sports like wrestling. And then also have fun. It doesn't need to be... This is one thing I learned over time. It doesn't need to be super, super, super serious. You can be professional and enjoy each other's company and have a good time, which is why we introduced many years ago the process where after training we'll have a communal cup of juice and chat and so forth.
Okay, well that actually leads me now into, I guess, Team Takedown itself, where we are right now. So how did Team Takedown get started?
Thank you. Team Takedown is my wrestling club. It's invitation only, and that invitation is based on two columns of criteria. The first is about one's qualities as a human being, so his or her ethics, integrity, the way that he or she behaves both on and off the mat. And the second is around their potential as an athlete. And that's probably more important than that for me, because we've been in operation. You're wearing our 10-year anniversary top from 2016. So we've been around for 13 years now, and I've had some not world champions. No, I lie. Michael Takasi won a world championship. I've had some world champions, national champions, and fine competitors. Yet I'm also as proud of the team member who never competes, who trains to get the best out of him or herself. Now, I haven't answered your question. How it came about is in approximately 2005, 2006. It was in 2006. I started my own training group. I left the club in which I was training for ethical reasons, and I started a training group which was myself, my brother Albert, Trent Pearsons, my still assistant coach, and my long-standing student Mark Mandel, who is working for Google in San Francisco, the lucky bugger. And we just got together and trained in Richmond. And what happened is quite a few people started hearing we were training and approached me and asked if they could come and train. And we were preparing, essentially me, for the Beijing Olympic trials. And so I actually was thinking at the time, well, I enjoy coaching, but I don't have the time to really coach everybody. So I want to make sure that if people come along, I'm not going to be wasting my time. I want them to be serious.
You're getting the best out of it.
Correct. They don't need to have ever wrestled or even done athletic endeavours. I just wanted them to be coachable and serious. And so that's when I introduced the selection process and Team Takedown arose. And we've been lucky enough through their hard work and the support of our team members to have some outstanding competitors. And we're just as proud of the long-standing or even short-lived team members who became a better human being through the diligent practice of wrestling.
Okay, and can you talk about how many people you currently have on the roster?
Thank you. I know this because I've literally just been looking at the list.
Oh, there you go.
So we have 15 active members on our roster, and of that 15, 3 are on our leave of absence, one through injury rehab, one through focus on her personal life, and another because he has state karate coaching duties. Plus my long-standing student and team member Fiona Muxlow, who lives in Queensland.
Yep.
I'm sure, Townsville.
Yep.
Thank you. Yep. And Fiona I'm very proud of because she competed on the world stage and fought Chris Cyborg in Invicta FC when Cyborg was returning from a pen suspension, and her opponent was injured in the last 3 weeks, and no one was willing to fight her. And we put our hand up, and so Fiona was extremely courageous.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I also want to go through, I guess, because I'm very fortunate, obviously, a trainer, is I guess more in your training sessions, talking about more the mental side of it.
Sure.
In terms of, because obviously it's a lot more. Obviously, you sort of spoke about, because we've got our physical training, but I suppose, what sort of work do you do in terms of, I know you've sometimes touched on it in terms of the mind, the body and...
Thank you, Greg. I embed a lot of mental, particularly resilience, which is the area of my PhD. I build a lot of resilience, fostering techniques and exhortations into my techniques and coaching. For example, and you might be able to depict this over the podcast later on. We'll do drills which are not instructional drills, so our take that into 3 submissions drill. And what that drill is aiming to do is, one, blend the takedown into submissions for the grappling competitors. Yet I've also bundled into that the need for our team members to continually immerse themselves and to be present, and if they take too long to move from the first to the second submission, I'll correct them because I want it to blend seamlessly into. So if you've taken someone down with a double leg, you've got them down in side control with them on their back. Well, there's an arm right there. I don't want you looking for the far leg over there. So in that instance, I'm endeavouring to train someone both physically and psychologically. Another primary example is our sprawled drilling.
I know that very well.
We're at the end of training.
Yes.
I will take our team through grueling sprawl drilling, where we might start off with a number 100. Then we will all do 100 sprawls in sets of 10. But funnily enough, that 100 seems to go off into the distance. And we just continue to keep drilling. And then, of course, my exhortations, which you will well remember as you've been traumatized, will be, we don't stop until I say the mind breaks before the body does. We can rest all we like in 5 minutes' time. Let's keep pushing. Don't let me break you. And so that's very much around testing the grit and mettle and building the mental toughness. Because as I'm sure you know, particularly now that you are in superb condition, that we foster our resilience through arduous training, not through just a wish. So you've actually got to do it to build the assurance and the confidence.
Wow, absolutely. Great answer. That's a really good answer.
My
now,
pleasure.
I guess steering slightly away from, Team Takedown. Now, you did mention earlier that you are also an official for the UFC.
I am.
So, can we talk about how that came about, how that opportunity arose? And
Thank you. I'm restricted with what I am willing to say.
Sure.
I am privileged to be an official for the Ultimate Fighting Championship in Australia and Asia with my brother Albert. I have how it came about is I have been officiating. I had been officiating Greg in the sport of mixed martial arts in Victoria since the inception of the sport, really going all the way back to perhaps about 2002 or so, when there were almost anomalies. There were some mixed martial art bouts on mixed fight cards where there might be some K1 kickboxing matches, then one or two Muay Thai boxing matches, then one or two boxing matches, and then there'd be this new sport of mixed martial arts would have one.
And this is prior to the
bout.
cage, obviously.
Absolutely,
The ring.
absolutely. And so that was probably about 2002, 2003, 2004. Then John Donahue brought out Randy Couture and Bruce Buffer and held 3 professional Shuto events under the name No Holds Barred Fighting in Victoria in approximately 2002, I believe. And then the Combat Sports Board of Victoria approached me in approximately 2004, 2005 and asked me to officiate in a professional bout on a mixed card at the Sunshine Hotel, and I officiated at that, and that was how I, as a referee, and helped them put together the rule set. Excuse me, because this was, I think, just before the unified rules, and that was the start. Pardon me.
No, that's fine.
Excuse me, Greg.
That's right.
I was officiating hundreds of bouts as a referee and judge in Victoria primarily, and then in 2009, early 2010, an organisation called the Australian Fighting Championships contacted me and asked me to referee an event in Melbourne where Hector Lombard was the main draw, and he was fighting. Sorry, was it Hector Lombard? It was Jesse Taylor and Jeremy May, the former Ultimate Fighters, were fighting, were headlining that card, and they asked me to referee at that event. At that event, I met my now good friend and colleague Steve Percival, who was doing pretty much the same thing in New South Wales.
Sure.
And I befriended him. Shortly thereafter, we were invited to officiate in Tasmania's first professional mixed martial arts event, which was in a cage. We both did that, and then the UFC came to town, came to Sydney. And Steve invited me to become involved initially as a fight inspector, which I did for several events, and then in 2015 I was asked if I would be confident in judging in the event in Adelaide, and I responded extremely positively and have judged for the UFC at events ever since.
Okay. Now, I guess for me, actually, a question in terms of what I think we find fascinating is watching a fight from, I guess, an official point of view and also, I guess, a judge's point of view. Can you sort of talk about, I suppose, not only the difference, but as how you look into the fight, like especially from the judge's point of view?
Sure. That's a great question. The rules that we're using as judges to interpret and make our score are very, very specific. They're very, very specific. It's the revised unified rules of the Association of Boxing and Combat combative sports for mixed martial arts. So we actually use those. There are specific directions in the rules which guide our interpretation of what we see in our judging, which is not the same as what Joe Rogan is saying and the other colour commentators when the event is actually on. So I strongly encourage those listeners who find themselves absolutely appalled and gobsmacked at the judging to Google the revised unified rules of the Association of Boxing and Combative Sports for MMA, and actually read through, because they actually prescribe what constitutes a 10-10 round, what constitutes a 10-9 round, what constitutes a 10-8 round, 10-7 and so forth. And the three major criteria that we're assessing at any point in time. And those three criteria are in this order of priority. We firstly assess effective grappling and effective striking. Whichever in a round more time is spent or more action is, we'll prioritize that. Then effective aggressiveness, then effective cage or arena control. And within those three broad criteria, we're looking for impact on the opponent, and also duration. If effective grappling is the main criteria in a bout, we assess that by how long a combatant is actually controlling his or her opponent with his or her wrestling or groundwork, that sort of thing. How many near submission attempts he or she is affecting, that sort of thing. So I do encourage fans to read up.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think obviously, judges and referees, like at the end of the day, particularly with referees, if you don't have a referee, you don't have a sport competition.
Absolutely.
So,
having said that, there are bad officials, no doubt. And I find myself watching events just as appalled.
Now you've also published a book.
I have.
So,
woohoo.
Yes, Wrestling with Resilience.
I have indeed. Thank you.
Can you talk about, this is what has made you, first of all, want to write the book, and I guess it was our listeners a bit of an insight.
Thank you, Greg. Wrestling with Resilience, and I had the title before I had the book, by the way. Yeah, but it's wrestling.
Most people do.
Wrestling with Resilience is a handbook to take the reader. It's a self-driven handbook where you can read through the actual physical or the ebook, and it has a progressive series of activities to help build, firstly, your understanding of yourself, and then it gives you practical strategies to build resilience and mental toughness in whatever field of endeavour that you're undertaking. How it came to be is, for much of my first 23 years of working as a psychologist, at the end of every session, my patients or clients, Greg, would ask, Chris, you mentioned doing this or doing this. Could you write that down for me? So I've been madly writing down cards of I go off and read this or do this, or I've been writing down URLs and websites. And I actually thought, wouldn't it be handy if I had one guide that actually could have a whole series of recommended techniques to help people's mental health and build resilience. And so I looked everywhere and I couldn't find anything. I found a lot of very good sources, yet I couldn't find anything that one or two particular guides or tomes, and also it was going to cost a fortune to get permission to actually put them into things. So I thought I'd write my own with my PhD supervisor, Professor Simon Moss. And that's where Wrestling with Resilience emerged, which I'm really thrilled with the response it has received as a really, really effective and unique handbook.
Wow, okay. Now, where can someone go to find this?
Thank you very much for asking. It's readily available as an ebook on all the major platforms, and the print book is available via my website, may I?
Yeah,
which is Christopher Shen, that's SHEN.com.au. So that it can be ordered through my website. and the ebook is available on all the major platforms.
Great. And I guess one of the big ones for closing in, I guess for the rest of 2019, what's on the agenda? We'll see what else
Thank
is
you.
in store.
Thank you very much, Greg. I like to not just live life, I like to throttle life. And so I've got my 3 major organisations I'm working with as a team psychologist. So the Northern Knights Footy Club, Jumping Victoria, and also National Institute of Circus Arts. I'm really, really keen to contribute as best I can. I have my organisational psychology clients that I work with that I really enjoy, and then my patients. Team Takedown, of course, I coach where I can outside of my sporting duties, and I'm really grateful for my assistant coaches, Trent Teethsons, Mick Wilson and Albert, for coaching in my absence. Furthermore, I'd like to spend a lot of quality time with my partner Mia, and also officiate for the Ultimate Fighting Championship in Asia and Australia again. Rob Whittaker's fight will be rescheduled at some point in time, and I'd love to be working at that event, as I was actually originally working at that event in Melbourne.
Fantastic. All right, well, Chris, we'll close there. Well, thank you very much for your time.
My great pleasure, Greg. I'm delighted to chat to you, and of course, delighted to coach you as well.
Thank you very much. All right, well, that is our podcast for today. As I said, I will put the link down below for Chris's book, Wrestling Resilience, and we'll see you guys next week.